Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Fernanda Viegas. I am a professor of computer science here at Harvard and also had the privilege of being a Radcliffe Fellow last year. I'm one of the co-organizers of this conference tonight. We're delighted to see you all here. I also hear that there are many of you joining us online. And so let's get started. First, I would like to thank the many people who made this conference possible. So we owe a big thank you to the Radcliffe Institute, Dean Tomiko Brown-Nagin, who supported us and gave us a lot of autonomy to run with the program and to decide, what kind of framing, what kind of thinking, and what kind of discussions did we want to bring tonight and tomorrow. This program is also being co-sponsored by the Women in Public Policy program at the Harvard Kennedy School. So thank you. And I also want to very much thank you, my co-organizers, Iris Bonnet, Professor, Albert Pratt Professor of Business and Government at the Kennedy School, Rebecca Wasserman, Executive Director of Academic Ventures and Engagement here at Radcliffe. So thank you so much for making what could have been a very daunting task a delightful one. So thank you. All right, so let's get started. Gender and AI, promise and perils. I think one of the things that I often think about is this angst that people usually feel when we talk about AI. It kind of feels like AI is something that is being done to us instead of being done with us. And I think that part of the effort of putting together an event like this is to start to change that conversation. How can we all be thinking about AI? How can we all be thinking about what should be built? And after it's built, how it should be applied? What kind of policies do we want to see happen around this new and very, very powerful technology? I myself see a lot of the promise. I'm excited, as a professor here, I'm excited. I'm currently teaching a class to folks. One of my main expertises is data visualization. And I'm teaching a class for the first time where people who have never programmed are being able to create data visualizations that are quite interesting and sophisticated. And that is something that you couldn't do before. I also work with scientists who are doing amazing work in cancer research, in medical diagnostic research, in earthquake predictions and aftershock predictions. So there are all sorts of things from a scientific perspective that are really interesting and promising, just incredibly powerful tool that we have today. I also see a lot of problems. I'm sure you do too. Again, as a professor, one of the things I see is that because it's so easy to build with AI, all of a sudden, a lot of the students have a much lower understanding of what it is that they're building, or if something breaks, how do they fix it? What do they need to change? How do they test the systems that they are creating? So this notion of what skills are we gaining, what skills are we giving away, how do we balance, what are the new things that we haven't even imagined yet that we'll be able to do? I think these are all, this is part of what makes this moment so interesting. But because, again, we're at an inflection moment here, right? I think we all need to come together and be thinking about what kind of future we want. How do we build these things in the best way possible? So with that in mind, one of the things I'm very excited about with this conference is how we put it together, what was the thinking that went into. I'm hoping all of you will join us again tomorrow. Tomorrow we have a full day program. And one of the ways that we decided to think about gender in AI was sort of like, how do you follow the workflow of AI today? So how do you think about inputs, right? We all have heard that data is super important, and it is. So how do we think about what goes into these systems? The data sets, the algorithms, what is it that we're asking these systems to learn? How do they learn? What are the framings there? So that's the first session in the morning. Then the second session is going to talk about outputs. Once we have these systems, these powerful systems, and we start to release them out into the wild, into society, what happens then? And we're going to have a series of very quick presentations on real systems in the real world, and some of the, again, the promises, the kinds of exciting things that one can do today, but also some of the challenges, very much like practical challenges that we see. There's going to be a whole discussion about different domains. There's going to be some discussion about healthcare applications, government applications, hiring, what is the future of hiring, and so forth. And then finally, towards the end of the day, we're going to talk about policy and advocacy. How do we, now that we have these systems, good and bad, or you know, promising and problematic, how do we think about what needs to happen from a governance perspective? Or what kind of regulation would we like to see? What kinds of questions can we ask in terms of policy? So these are, and then finally, at the end, we have what promises to be a really exciting keynote by Rana, I want to say her last name correctly, so let me find her here. Rana El-Kalyoubi. Rana El-Kalyoubi. You may have heard of her. She's both she was both a researcher in the field of AI before it was cool. She's also a founder of a startup that is quite well known called Affectiva. And she's now an investor and a podcast host, and someone who's really steeped in the, very active in the world of business and what can be done with AI, but comes to it from a perspective of human flourishing. How can we actually put the human in the center of these systems that we build? So I'm very excited. I'm also excited about how we're opening this conference. It's you know, not by chance that we're opening this conference tonight with art. Art is very near and dear to my heart. Even though I'm a computer science professor, I have done a little bit of art with data visualization as well. And one of the things that's very clear to me when you do art is that it allows you to ask very different kinds of questions, right, than a scientist might ask or a policymaker. And so the panel we have tonight, I am very excited about, because not only am I a fan of the work that the three artists are bringing, but even in calls we had before the conference just talking about what should we talk about tonight, I already felt an edge of, there's so many layers of interesting thoughts that go way beyond what you might be hearing on the media about AI and art. Well, I'm sure you will talk about that as well, but I'm very excited because they work with AI as a medium, really, and both as collaborator, but also as a cultural object to inspect and investigate and inquire about. So there's a lot of power in that. Okay, so let's get started. Let me introduce to you our moderator, Mary Flanagan. Mary is an artist, researcher, and professor. She's the Sherman Fairchild Distinguished Professor of Digital Humanities at Dartmouth College. In her very interdisciplinary practice, she investigates the intersection between technology, play, and the human experience. She's interested in how technologies represent hidden biases, and she sees the computer as a collaborator. Flanagan has exhibited internationally extensively, including in venues such as the Guggenheim in New York, Tate Britain, Museu de Arte, Arquitetura e Tecnologia in Lisbon, the Whitney Biennial of American Art. Her work is featured in public and private collections, including the Whitney Museum, ZKM, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and more. And and by the way, there's a lot more to be said about Mary, but as if this weren't enough, she's also been invited as a cultural leader at the World Economic Forum at Davos. So without much further ado, please welcome Mary Flanagan.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be at this, what I think is going to be an amazing conference. I don't know if there's ever been an event with this many women who know so much technology. It's very exciting. So in my remarks tonight, I just want to set the stage a little bit for the conversation with the artists. And I want to start with a quote by Marc Chagall. "Great art picks up where nature ends," said Chagall, the Russian-born French expressionist of the 20th century. Chagall challenged the traditional idea that art merely imitates nature, suggesting that art expands and transcends it, shaping ways we conceive of our realities. So welcome to our opening discussion on gender and AI, promise and perils, where we focus exclusively on artistic expression. But before we proceed, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the past as we look to the future. In 1955, some of you may know this, in 1955, a group of white male scientists and mathematicians on a New England college campus coined the term artificial intelligence during a conference organized by John McCarthy, then a mathematics professor at Dartmouth College. In his proposal, McCarthy suggested the conference would operate under the conjecture that every aspect of learning or intelligence could precisely be described and simulated by a machine. That was the premise. This initial discussion led to countless research projects that continue to provoke fundamental questions today. Who determines what intelligence is? What perspectives are included in the development of intelligence? Unlike McCarthy's conjecture, perhaps we can agree that there is no singular, universal definition of intelligence that we can rely on. Considerations such as embodied cognition, gut intelligence, situated intelligence, and many more complicate this idea. Should a select few elite creators dictate intelligence for society at large? Research in science and technology studies has long established that technologies are never neutral, and artists often begin their explorations from this premise. There is no doubt that AI and ML are currently shaping lives right now, from hiring practices to border security and beyond. Bruno Latour famously stated, "Technology is society made durable," which only tells part of the story. Our techno-social relations are highly symbiotic, as technology also shapes society, solidifying cultural norms and values. Moreover, it creates new contexts and influences society without public acknowledgement or consent. Casual decisions made by a privileged few can quickly become societal norms, informed by historical narratives of power and dominance. We must remember that emerging technologies have consistently prompted critical reflections on authenticity, authorship, and the potential of art. Many may be surprised to learn that digital art has been exhibited since the 1960s, during which early programs operated on cumbersome computers often lacking elements we now take for granted, like monitors and mice. One notable pioneer, Harold Cohen, created an AI painting robot named Aaron in the early 1970s. Although Aaron differed significantly from modern AI systems, it did possess a degree of agency. Christian Paul, curator of digital art at the Whitney, notes that Aaron had a lot of autonomy and could also improve its craft within defined parameters. While Aaron's knowledge base was limited to the categories Cohen provided, such as spaces, figures, and plants, it still had millions of options to create unique compositions. Paul considers Aaron an early example of symbolic AI, operating within an internal feedback system that responded to modifications in its agency. Art allows us to investigate and speculate on the implications of technological development, offering both cautionary tales and sources of inspiration. Intersectional perspectives that recognize diverse viewpoints are essential for improving AI and ML and establishing more ethical foundations as these technologies fill our everyday lives. We must shape how AI operates across a diverse spectrum of people and experiment with how code can foster collective good. So I'm grateful to be part of this vital conversation tonight, along with my fellow artists and all of you joining, whether near or far. Welcome. And first, I would like to introduce, I think I do that. First, I would like to introduce Anna Ridler. Anna Ridler is a London-based artist and researcher whose work focuses on the exploration of information collections and self-generated data sets to craft innovative and distinctive narratives across various mediums. She delves into knowledge systems and the technology creation process to deepen her understanding of the world with a particular interest in measurement and quantification and their relationship to the natural environment. Her creative approach often involves leveraging data to develop new and unconventional storytelling techniques. Ridler earned her master's degree in information experience design from the Royal College of Art and a bachelor's degree in literature from Oxford University. And she's been a fellow at the Creative Computing Institute at the University of Arts London, and her work has been exhibited at cultural institutions worldwide, including the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Barbican Center, Centre Pompidou, HEK Basel, ZKM, Ars Electronica, and more. So I'd like to welcome Anna Ridler to the stage.
Thank you. I am going to give a very brief overview of my practice and how I've been approaching working with machine learning and algorithms and complex systems for over a decade. My work sits at the intersection of science, art, and technology, and I'm extremely interested in process. I like to make everything that comes out of my studio from start to finish. So that is everything from the data sets. I'll take thousands of photographs, draw hundreds and hundreds of drawings, through to the model, through to the eventual output, through to kind of how it's installed. This allows me to understand the different social, political, and economic systems that underpin everything, the art, the science, the technology. They all have these, and they're all kind of playing together and working sometimes against each other. A lot of my practice, as Mary mentioned, has to do with nature or natural history, or kind of how, more precisely, how humans see and try to categorize the world. Playing Now is a work that I made for the Photographers Gallery in London back in 2020, I think. I came to machine learning through data, and to data through my interest in dictionaries and encyclopedias. I was originally an English literature student. It's all about how you order the world, who decides what's important, and which kind of cultural attitudes are going to get ensured. These problems are well known to historians and librarians. Classification without thought is so prevalent in modern implementations of machine learning, and much of my work is reacting against these histories that are are present through the process of making. And I think this is the process that really can kind of offer a different perspective on things. I've always been interested in data sets, and I've been building my own data sets since I started working with machine learning as a way of unpicking the technology and understanding the associated power relations and labor behind it. A data set that I'm most well known for and keep coming back to again and again is tulips. I took 10,000 photographs of tulips in the Netherlands over the course of several months. And this was driven by the rhythms of nature. Although 10,000 is a nice round number, I stopped because tulip season stopped. The physical world kind of makes itself present even in the digital. Doing this forces me to examine each tulip and subsequent image and inverts the usual process of creating a data set. And it's very physical when you do this, buying, moving, stripping hundreds and hundreds of tulips, the realness of the world that is often obscured when you're just sitting at a computer. And this is something that I do a lot of. And I chose to make this data set into an artwork in and of itself. This is a piece called Myriad, which is an installation of thousands of these hand-labeled photographs. And I think this act of taking it and making it into something, into an artwork, is really important. It forces an examination of it and an understanding of its place. Language is a really important part of this work. The categorization and labeling of the photographs is a core part of how computation works. And each photo has the labels that are used. Handwriting draws the attention to the human decision-making and how this is not always a correct thing. Something is orange or red or pink. It depends on how I was feeling that day and what I saw before it. Bias is unavoidable, but by working with my own data and my own labels, the errors are mine and mine alone. And I think there's something also interesting about doing this work and making it visible in making a parallel in the history of computing. Computation or computer was originally just someone who would compute things, and by making that visible, it's showing it as well. And to make this work, I installed it, which is around 50 square meters. When you put all of these photographs up on a wall. And data can be comprehended in this way, in a very different way than if you were just scrolling through those images on a thumb drive. You're forced to walk by them. You're forced to see the labor. You're forced to understand the time that went into it. And you can feel the money and effort that goes into constructing a data set. I did all of this work to create an artwork that's called Mosaic Virus that I made using GAN. This is a piece which responds to the price of Bitcoin, referencing tulip mania. The petals change shape and appearance according to whether the price of Bitcoin goes up and down. And it's something that I wouldn't be able to do unless I made my own data set. It's very much the piece works with what I made. And I couldn't have downloaded 10,000 photographs of tulips from Google and created this piece. There's something core about doing that work myself, having the concept, making the thing. I am going to talk, and I also had access to DALL-E when it first came out. I very briefly want to say that there is a real difference from working how I did with the data set, with building everything, with having the idea and the concept, and how I felt working with these very large text-to-image models. I find it very difficult for a long time to use these because the things that I find most interesting about working with machine learning, the process, the ability to unpick and uncover, to see what it says and mean about the world, is obscured behind either an API or by the sheer weight of data that's needed to train from scratch. And these came out, I played with these in spring 2022, and these were the errors that I got. And it's even harder now to make something interesting. I didn't work with it then because I thought it was not interesting visually, and it's even harder now. It's too perfect. The errors are not there in the same way. And then just to end, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what I'm working on now and what I'm finding interesting. And that's increasingly synthetic data and how it's used. This is a project that I made a couple of years ago called the Synthetic Iris Dataset, which is referencing the original iris dataset that was made in the 1930s. It's often included in statistical analysis, but I ran the same prompt through DALL-E, Midjourney, and Stable Diffusion to generate 150 images of irises, and then ran those images through a computer vision algorithm to see what it would see. In many ways, this is an inverse of Myriad, where I was trying to teach the computer what the world is. This is me trying to understand what a machine sees in a machine-generated image and the weirdness that ensues. Some of the kind of confidence scores that you can see up there are reasonable, things like flower and petal. Others are absolutely less so. It sees skies and events and things like that. And it really makes you question how these things are working, where they're finding these things. Language muddles things, and you can kind of, and iris is also an ambiguous word. It can mean a flower, it can be a name, it can also mean the center of an eye, and it kind of sees eyes and colors where they shouldn't be. And that, for me, is a real question of how are these things working in the world now? So just to end, much of my work is the actual doing, and I think, and the practice of looking and knowing and retranslating what I see and what a machine sees is a core part, I think, of where this kind of changes and becomes art. Not every image that is made is art, but this looping method from analog, I find, from analog to digital, maybe back to analog again, allows me kind of the space and the opportunity to do that and to think about these things. Thank you.
Fabulous, thank you. Now I'd like to introduce our next artist, Stephanie Dinkins. Stephanie Dinkins is a multifaceted artist and educator whose work merges emerging technologies with explorations of our future narratives. Her artistic practice is devoted to establishing a space for meaningful dialogue around artificial intelligence in relationship to pressing social concerns. As a recipient of the L.G. Guggenheim Award and recognized as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in AI in 2023, Dinkins utilizes technology and storytelling to reevaluate and reshape the narratives affecting marginalized groups, particularly Black and Brown communities. Through her various installations, digital initiatives, and community-focused projects, Dinkins not only critiques existing frameworks of AI development, but also paves the way for creating a more fair and inclusive technological environment. With this, I'd like to welcome Stephanie.
Hello, and thank you, everyone. I think I am up. Please let me know if I'm not. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person, but I'm excited to get to talk to you all and hear what folks are thinking. This is me, and the stories we tell our machines is the thing that I am thinking about most right now. I will loop back to this, but I've been on a journey in very many ways, right? To explore really what the technologies that are coming our way mean to communities of color, communities of disability, communities of difference of any sort, and what we might do or how we might react and act with and around the technology to, make the world, I think, a little better. Like I'm a little oddly Pollyanna about the idea that I think the technology has a lot of space for us to use and grow with and wonder what we can do with it. I also share a bit of Anna's practice in terms of process, right? So my work is really born out of curiosity and process and trying to get to know the technologies. For example, this image is an image pulled from a project that I've been doing for a long time now called Conversations with Bina 48. I believe in around 2016, I went to meet this robot. And it's a humanoid robot that they are trying to transfer consciousness to in a way. And I was just wondering how she became a Black woman, why she existed, who was funding her, and what it meant to my world. And it's been a fascinating journey to be able to talk to Bina 48, start to get to know it, but also got me to this point where I had to question what this robot was and what it truly represented, especially for the Black women that she visually represents. My end conclusion is that, Bina 48 is a thing in the world like many other things, but because she was primarily created by white men, and these are some of the biases that we've been talking about already, and I want to say really well-meaning folks, right, that her representation of Blackness was, in my estimation, pretty flat or politically correct, which was not an accurate rendering. And I had to wonder, what does it mean for the rest of us if we are being rendered flat through the way that we are described in these systems? So this is the lesson of Bina 48 for me. My original question for this project was, can a robot and a human become friends, a human artist become friends? And the answer to that is in some ways yes, and in some ways no. We are now conference buddies. But Conversations with Bina 48 led to this project called Not the Only One, which is now my attempt to create an entity that better represented what I particularly know as Blackness and what a Black family is and what a Black family cares about. And notice that I am saying a Black family because I do think it only represents our family, but it was my attempt at kind of putting the ethos of our family into a system and seeing if our ethos could carry forward some ideas that I thought were being lost over time. For example, I was quite worried that let's say my great nieces would never understand what my grandmother knew and her methods of being in the world, which I think are quite valuable, and wanted to find a way to port that forward. And so what I tried to do was take oral histories, right, from my family. So 3 generations of women of my family sat down together and started interviewing each other. And the aim was to create this voice interactive artificial intelligence or chatbot, really, to tell a multi-generational story of the family. I don't think it ever got to what I was really aiming for. But in the process, as Anna was referring to, I learned an awful lot. And I continue to learn. You will hear me as I talk about these projects. I do have relationships with them as ongoing things because they continue to develop and grow. But this project in particular, when it is in public, it's amazing to me what it pulls from others in terms of the grace they try to show it to get it to communicate, because it's really underdeveloped to really be a fluid communicator. It only has 40,000 lines of bespoke oral history to inform it. And then I had a lot of trouble trying to figure out what I could ground it on, what could be the foundation, what language could be the foundation for the project. And that then led to my quest to find language and things that I felt okay putting my family's information history atop. And that's been really interesting because it made me think about what's good enough, right? Not only for my family, but the communities I care about. And that leads out to all of us. I will say that in the process, people would suggest all sorts of things for me to use as language basis. For example, the Cornell movie data set was one, which I thought was really not good enough for my family, because if you think about the history of movies, particularly American history, there's little space for Blackness in them, and often it is violent, right, the language. So I didn't want to use that. People then suggested things like Reddit, because there is a nice conversational repository available. However, again, this linguistic violence becomes a thing, right? We know what goes on in these spaces, and I did not think I could put my family's history on that. Even the suggestion of Wikipedia kind of made me recoil because of the way that information is gate kept there. So what eventually happened is that I started to build my own data set, which is inadequate, right? However, more loving, caring, nurturing to the information that it was to hold than what I could find. And so I made the decision to have a project that was really inept in some ways in terms of communication, but held the ethos and of the family and could port that forward. And that was the most important thing to me. So I let it ride in that way. That piece also taught me a lot about this idea of listening, this idea that to listen and truly hear another is an act of love, and wanting to encourage folks to then be able to think about what it means to nurture self, and then nurture each other and try to figure out what we were wanting. This is a piece that was an installation that asked people in particular, what do you need to release to go forward? So in addition to this projection, people could press a button and then open the camera on their screens and give the answer to that question. And it made this kind of cited like compendium of answers or videos of people answering this question. And it was evident to me in the answers that we needed space, that we wanted space, and we were really desiring this way to move forward and define ourselves, which also led me to another piece where, this is a little washed out and I apologize, where I'm thinking about some of the same things, except this one is much more directed again around kind of my story, my family. And I will tell you that I choose to use that as the information base because it's the thing or a thing I care deeply about and enough to kind of put the time, effort into to actually do the work, because I am a photographer. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a computer scientist. I think of myself as someone who plays, who tinkers, who is willing to put in the work to see if they can get something better out of the system and see what it has to hold. So this is a piece called Secret Garden, where we use this kind of video projection to tell 6 different stories of 6 different women who are historically connected, but the stories that you hear in the space and the things that you see are kind of disconnected. And the idea is that the stories of each of these women builds on the last and the next and the next, and that we can't separate ourselves from the past or the present or the future without seeing the whole. For the audience, what it was being able to stand and dwell and be with these women. They were greater than life size, and truly listen, right? Give an ear. So if more than 1 or 2 people collected together and stood still long enough, they would get more of the story. And that's where the kind of artificial intelligence interaction comes in. But it's about this idea of give and take, call and response, being able to truly hear, particularly in this instance, Black women's stories. I'm hopping around a little bit, but I'm going to give you this piece because all these pieces that I've done up till now, including Secret Garden, led me to this question of, well, what do we do, or how do we inform systems so that they know us as we know ourselves? And really, if I think to Secret Garden taught me that our stories are our algorithms. We've used them for millennia to inform each other. And so how can we start to get that information from others and put it into a system, and in my instance, build another data set that might be able to use to inform or even infect greater systems so that they have that information. So this is a kind of temporary installation at the Guggenheim. It was a first outing for the project, The Stories We Tell Our Machines, which is going to be this big project that eventually forms a kind of suite of works that I will call a book. But the idea was to ask people questions like, what should I know about us and our communities, have them answer, and then let them see the process of what their answer sees, how the computer is translating it, and then how I, as artist, through my own aesthetic, translated it. But what I've come through this work and all of my work, which is, as Anna was mentioning, super process-based, never ends and ongoing, is that our systems must be nurtured to understand communities as the communities understand themselves. And we need to be able to lay a groundwork. And the question becomes then, how can we do that? And what do we have to do? And my answer to that question is called data gifts. And so going forward, I will be doing other works where I go out into the street. For example, in June in Brooklyn, I will have a container-based AI lab that goes out and asks people for their stories as gifts, so that we can build a data set that we then use to indeed infect or lend to greater data systems, so that the systems that we live within, around, rely on, can better care for, right? I'm going to say indeed love us, and I love to add the word love in context, particularly in academic context, because I don't think we can leave this out and get the results that we truly need to hold society as a whole well, so that they and we can all thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Stephanie's joining us here on the panel. We see you. Wonderful. I'd love to continue thinking about this idea of love and care, and extrapolate for both of our panelists on, we see that you've dealt with embodiment and other kinds of challenges in creating your own custom databases. Could you talk about what could possibly be data sets of love in a variety of contexts, or in your own work?
So shall I take that? I can start. For me, love is story. Love is listening. Love is process and doing the work to get the thing out. Love is kind of shepherding as well, right? In the beginning, when we opened, there was the talk about what it means for people to take on, see, live in AI ecosystems, as I call them, and what our reactions are and what the media tells us about that. And I think in communities on the fringes, in particular, we're often told we have no recourse, there's nothing to do, and we're also given fear. And so I see one of my duties, I will say, is to help people see it as an opportunity, or as something that is not just a surveillance tool, right? Or a tool of control, but also something that could be, if we participate and guide it, something much greater. And then at the base level, also an entree to some economic, mobility.
Thank you.
And just to build on what you were saying, for me, a data set of love, of love, is through the act of noticing, and through that act of observation. Because it's very rare, I think, that you actually properly look at an object, or look at a thing, or look at a person and really notice it. But when you're creating these things, when you're doing that, you're really properly looking at something. And that is an act of love. It's an act of kind of engaging with that thing in the world. It's an act of kind of, so I think for me, that act of noticing, that act of observation, that act of really kind of seeing something is what makes the way that I work kind of an act of love.
Great. And I think this leads me to my next question about the role of an artist in a technologically mediated world, right? What is your product?
That is a question.
Sorry.
Because, the artwork itself changes across every single project. Sometimes it's the data set, sometimes it's a projection, sometimes it's the model, sometimes it's the experience of people engaging with it. It changes all the time. And that could be the product. It could be me as an artist in this world, kind of interfacing with all of these different systems. And it could also be the kind of the process itself, the way of making, the way of kind of doing all of that work that I'm also revealing, because it's a choice for me to reveal all of this process, all of this making, how I think. So it shifts, and it kind of depends on the context, and it depends on the different spaces that I'm in.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, please jump in.
I was just going to say that I would agree with that, and then I would say for myself, the process is really the art for me, and then the objects or whatever comes out of it is the way to get people to engage that. The other things that I'm really invested in is spreading ideas. I did a show a few years back called Unleavened Data, and I named it that very particularly because if nobody ever saw the work, that phrase, I hope, moves on without the work, as with the stories we tell our machines, right? I'm hoping that we can get people to trigger in ways that they can hear ideas and maybe push a tiny little shift in the way they're working in terms of unleavened data, because people usually look kind of quizzically and go, what does that mean? And why would we even say it? And that's not the way it works. And so they're kind of these little idea pleas for me.
Thank you. I have a question about how you see your relationship to science. But sometimes some of your artifacts are actually scientific documents. Sometimes you're using a process that comes out of mathematics or computer science. Could we just have some ideas about that relationship as productive? I'm just curious about that. Anna's going to go first.
I collaborate a lot with scientists. I think that scientists and artists, both of them are questioning how the world works. They both want to understand how the world works, but they're just going about it from two very different ways. I find science to be very inspirational, but science is not neutral. Science, like anything, has its own biases, its own narratives, its own way of kind of understanding and making the world. And I find it very interesting. But people kind of, I feel, treat science as being more neutral than it actually is. And I find as an artist it very interesting to try and pull that out and to repurpose and reposition it and to kind of dig into it through that way and treat it as a narrative that can get explored. So I find working with scientists to be very inspirational, but also something to be not to be taken kind of at face value, to also to try and explore it and see the hidden histories and biases that kind of sit inside of it.
Stephanie, do you have any ideas about that?
Oh yeah, I have lots of ideas like that. About that, I tend to work in collaboration with folks across many different sectors, the sciences included, and it's a really fraught relationship for me, right? We don't speak the same languages, right? I'm always trying to figure out what the language is that I can speak that we can work together and understand each other and push. And this idea of the questioning, right? So Anna's point that it is not natural, right? That the way things are done are not necessarily the way that things have to be done. And one of my stances is, well, in lieu of being able to have clear communication and aims, I ask 2-year-old questions often. And that's usually a why or a why not. And I love to have those questions in my pocket and then kind of put them in the world and see what they can do so that we don't go with the status quo all the way, all the time. And we're not always going towards the same aims. And at the same time, I'm in search of the language that I can speak so that we can work more fluidly together. And in fact, that not only me and the scientists can work together, but that throughout society, we can have more open conversations because we are speaking in terms that we understand deeply across sectors, across races, across social class.
Thank you. I have a question about ethics. A lot of people like to talk about ethics and AI and machine learning and where the data sets are coming from. Clearly, we understand your data sets, and we have some questions from the audience I'll get to about data sets in a minute. But do you stumble into ethical quandaries in your work? And what does that look like? Let's start with Stephanie this time.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that one. I mean, I feel like I'm constantly stepping across ethical concepts, but also trying not to get waylaid by those questions, right? Because often it's a point where people stop, right? Well, if a question doesn't seem in line with the community outside of the mainstream, they kind of stop or go to fight it. And one of my ways is, well, how can we encounter this ethical question? Think about what it means. Think about how we live with, around, between, betwixt, over, under it. And I think that that's a stance that the margins or the underutilized understand really well. And in a way, what I'm trying to say is that, well, yes, there are ethical problems. Yes, when I run into them, I want to call them out and ask the people who have power in a certain way to change on a large level to do that. But also, I want to survive this world that we are creating. And what does that mean in terms of how I address that ethical issue? And sometimes it might be head on, taking it on. And sometimes it might be, well, I'm going to go around this so that I can get done what I need to get done, because this is a distraction from what the work truly is. Not a popular take on ethics, but kind of where I go.
Thank you.
I also think about it deeply as I think anyone who kind of does the work that kind of Stephanie and I do when we're doing all of the, sorting everything, building everything, you think about it. And I've tried to in the past kind of make everything myself and to kind of work at it through that way. But now the way that the technology has evolved makes that almost impossible. So I am having to work with kind of data that other people have made. But the way I'm trying to understand and unpick it as a way of kind of working with it, it gets messy. It's hard to make work with the kind of systems that are so prevalent now, and kind of keep a very pure kind of way of working. It's almost impossible.
That was another question I had for you about scale. As both of your projects really grapple with the scale of how much data you can get and where you're really engaging, starting from the personal is very different than creating a global network. How do you think about, is there a possibility to expand the scale of what you're trying to do?
So I'm at the moment trying to read every single caption in Lion B, which is driving me. It's not fun, but I think it goes back to your question about how do you make it a data set of love. It's through noticing, it's through seeing, and I feel more comfortable kind of using these things if I'm kind of looking at everything and seeing the caption and thinking about it that way. But it's impossible to do. It's the process of doing it is the artwork. But there is something there, but the scale is so large, and that's something that I'm trying to grapple with now.
Yeah, and I take up scale in a way that, there's a lot of refusal in my practice to move bigger. There have been requests to, professionalize it or make it a company or do this. But what that does is take away what I think of as my privilege as an artist to kind of do things very differently. And then the hope for me is that when I do it small and I make an attempt that is good enough to at least, be put in public and stand up, that becomes a model for what is possible, and I get to challenge others with that model. I hope to kind of, spark many other folks in doing work that is similar from whatever perspective or place that they stand in. And so I try not to grapple too far with scale, but also at the same time, I agree with Anna in that as things get better, as they look more seamless, or as the results get good, we start to notice less. And then the question becomes for me, well, how do I get even more microscopic and notice more to see where the cracks are and where the harms that are way more buried within the quote unquote, I'm going to say perfection of the thing, where they lie and what needs to be done about or for or with them.
Just to also kind of like echo what you were talking about earlier about being comfortable with putting things that don't necessarily work that well out into public, I think is also a way of kind of like working against scale. I think like I've shown work and I've had computer scientists come up to me and be like, but I can help you make it better and make it look good. And you're like, that's not the point. The point is to show how it doesn't work or how it won't work with things. And I think that's also such a powerful, or can be a really interesting way of kind of like dealing with scale, is to the option of not making it work or refusing to work with it.
Thank you.
Agreed, for sure.
Great. I'd like to take some questions from the audience at this point in our evening, if that's fine with everyone. One question that I've found in our collection is about the idea of the word data set. Is the word data set a loaded term for our artists, or is it equivalent to experience or record or annal?
Wow. Data set is not so loaded for me. It's me taking on some of the ways that things already work to get work done. But also for me, if I'm saying an equivalent, it's more an equivalent of archive. Right? And that's where I kind of sit with that.
Yeah, I would agree that archive is probably a closer word to you, or an equivalent word. I actually really don't like the word data set. I think I just don't like it. I think it sounds horrible, sounds cold and algorithmic, and not that that's necessarily bad, but I do push back sometimes when people say, oh, you're a data set artist, because I think it doesn't necessarily, to a non-technical audience, it doesn't necessarily convey some of the things that I find most interesting.
All right, and I think we have some follow-up ideas about that. So, Stephanie, you mentioned this gatekeeping in data, gatekeeping on Wikipedia and other environments, and we could try to influence these databases, but their structuring itself is also one of the challenges, right? So, do you think we need completely new systems?
Yeah, if I had my druthers, we would be building different systems. Right, we would be rethinking ourselves and our relationships and how we deal with each other basis, and then we would build different kinds of systems and hold our information differently. But given the current state of things and the information we have, then it becomes, well, this exists, right? Like my attitude towards AI is. My attitude towards racism is sexism, same thing. And now I have to deal with that system or whatever is in place. And the question becomes, how do you do that, and how do you do it well and come out healthy? And so, it's for me a question of which of the fights do you want to take up? The giant one that maybe we'll get to, or the more protopian one where we make these little steps and you keep encouraging different kinds of change with actually the bigger aim in sight, but getting more folks to add a drop to the pot to see if we can change what the pot looks like and feels like, even though it has its own meta logic.
We don't have to go. All right, we have some more questions. This one's more existential. The idea of unmanageable scale of data reminds us of T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, which that's a good one. A flood of references, shards, footnotes without context. Is this the lesson for today? Is this also today's lesson?
Yes.
Nice. Yeah.
I
And what
mean,
do we do with that?
yeah. How do we respond to it? How do you take that and how do you make that kind of that flood of kind of information and shards into knowledge, into something that can be useful and important?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, go
And
ahead.
can I add one little thing? Because it's also for me, like, how do we open up to that and be able to, what I think about as surf it? Because I'm thinking a lot about surfing the things coming at us. And it seems to open doors to portals that we have closed in the past in terms of what actually exists, what is actually real, what is not, what's past, present, and future. So intuition and knowledge being on the same level in a way. Like, I think there's a space that is starting to collapse in this flood of things that are coming to us, and that means an opening, but only if we let it be an opening.
Can we talk a little bit about the use of AI in general? And we have a question about profiting from the work of the Global South by AI art in the North. How do we decolonize AI and deal with its extractive potential?
Okay, I will. It's interesting, right? I think its extractive potential is real. I think it has extractive qualities, but I also think we live within it. And so I really take a look from Blackness, especially American Blackness, when we've lived in a world where things have pulled out from under us left and right, and you still have to contend with the world that you were given. So then the question becomes, well, how do you navigate that world? And what does it mean? Do you throw your hands up and say, well, there's nothing I can do? Or do you kind of jump in, do what you can in the space that is given to you, and still have fights going on about kind of quelling some of that? And how do we stop the cycle, right? Like, I don't have to do it in the same way as others are doing it. I can point out the things that are extractive, and we can start to try to build towards what feels more equitable, although I don't know what more equitable actually looks like in the world. And clearly looking at the world now, it's hard to see. But again, I get these kinds of questions all the time, and it's always, for me, not about the system of the technology, but the systems that people set up and how we are willing or not to engage, what we're willing to give up or not. And so, I mean, I think it's talk to people around you and really start dealing with some of the discomforts and hard questions that sit behind us, like, quietly.
Should there be interventions to bridge the different mindsets and modes of inquiry between art and science, for example, in educational systems and pedagogy and all the other kinds of institutions that we have built?
So is the question asking how to make better art science? I mean...
And raise awareness about these different ways of looking at the world.
I think it's becoming, as Stephanie said earlier, it's about kind of refining a language that both science and art can speak. I think that increasingly people are more aware that there is this kind of commonality of inquiry across kind of both disciplines. And you see it through kind of, I think, the way that education systems are set up now, where there's there's a whole kind of emphasis on STEAM, at least in the UK, where art is embedded and kind of woven into these kind of, into the kind of like systems. I think it's kind of, it's a kind of relatively, I feel, recent thing, but I feel that there is this kind of drive to kind of combine them more and more, and for it to be split, and to be split less into, you're either a scientist or an artist, because that's not how you are. Most people are just curious.
Ooh, I love that, Aldo. The idea that most people are just curious. And I would add that if we can start thinking about not only STEAM, but removing some of the hierarchical thinking around the two disciplines, right? And then actually around many disciplines. And almost, I would say, require everyone to be an artist or at least explore the arts. It would be interesting because thinking changes then. And I will add, just in thinking about what that means, I even look for doctors who are artists, who are able to think in a different way and show a different kind of care and compassion towards folks. And our training does not support that, right? Our like, if you think just medical students, they're not trained towards artistry or compassion or curiosity often. And it's like, how do we engender that in folks over time? And I think that would help bridge some of that language barrier and ways of thinking barrier.
Which would ultimately affect policy and larger systems.
Yes.
Well, with that, I think we're ready to wrap up our evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we look forward to tomorrow, starting sharp at 9 o'clock, but first we'll hear from, I think we're going to hear from Fernanda.
Thank you so much, Mary, Anna, and Stephanie. Wow, I have to say, so many thoughts. I just love the data set of love. I'm literally going to take this back to my research lab, and I'm going to ask my PhD students, how can you put together a data set of love? What does that mean to you? And I think it's a very compelling and provocative question. I also have to say, a lot of what you all were talking about in terms of how the care with which you put together the data sets, but also how personal and how much control you want to have over the data sets and how you're trying things that are smaller to try to show the cracks, that is so scientific too. So there's a lot of folks in computer science who are doing that too. So I just feel like we should be talking more. That's my takeaway from this. All right, so thank you again for starting us off and setting the tone for the whole conference. We hope you will join us tomorrow morning for the continuation of this conference, which, as I said, is also co-sponsored by the Radcliffe Institute and the Women in Public Policy program at the Harvard Kennedy School. Tomorrow's program has a wonderful lineup of speakers. As we just demonstrated, it continues tomorrow. And will feature sessions titled Inputs, Outputs, and Policy and Advocacy, as well as the keynote by Rana El-Kaloubi. Lunch will be provided to all the registered participants in person, the in-person attendees. Online registration is still open on the Radcliffe website, so please tell your friends, tell anyone who you think would be interested, radcliffe.harvard.edu. We'll reconvene here in the Knafel Center and online promptly tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Please be ready, and we hope to see you then. Thanks for joining us tonight, and have a good night. Thank you.